welcome to Groundwater Rising. This podcast is all about flooding, and in particular, as the title suggests, we focus on one of the most overlooked and misunderstood types, groundwater flooding. Historically, it's the least monitored, the least talked about, and often it's the last thing on the list when discussing flood risk. And it is that lack of understanding that can leave communities confused, unprepared, and unheard. I'm Helen from Project Groundwater, and I'll be speaking to community members who live with groundwater flooding, alongside the researchers, the engineers, the practitioners, all working to understand it better and to help reduce its impact. But I'm not here as a technical expert. I'm here to ask those questions that people outside the sector are maybe too embarrassed or just don't have that opportunity to ask. Questions like, what does that actually mean and why does it matter to me? Together, we're going to explore those real experiences, the emerging research, and the practical thinking from the water sector, academia, and beyond. And let's help make groundwater flooding something people can understand, talk about, and plan for. So this is my first time hosting Groundwater Rising, and today we are going to talk about water, but not in the way that you might expect. Most conversations around flooding and groundwater start when water becomes a problem, so when it's too much in the wrong place and at the wrong time. But what if the story started earlier than that? So today's conversation is going to start with puddles and play and permission to enjoy being outside when it rains. I'm joined by Hazle Cottle, an occupational therapist, and she's also a lecturer at the University of the West of England in Bristol. And she's the mind and the enduring energy behind Puddle Parks. Hazle, tell us about Puddle Parks. What are they and how did the whole idea come about?
Hi, Helen. Yes, Puddle Parks. So in my mind, Puddle Parks came about probably 7 or 8 years ago. I was out with my children on a rainy day. We went to a local park where there is a water channel. It's mains fed, but it has a pump and there are bits where the water runs down and the kids can play in it. And in the summer, they'd had a great time there. On this particular day, we went and the mains water had been shut off. There was no water in the channels. There was nothing to play with, which was a shame. And we were thinking about the rain that was coming down, which was making its way into the channels. And I just thought to myself, well, what if that was the reason for having the park designed in this way? What if you were thinking about using the rain that we get so much of to make an interesting play space for the kids? It would mean that this feature would still be running and the kids would be having a great time, but it sort of evolved in my head and I thought you could do something with it. You could maybe involve hydroelectric motors that are hidden away so that when the rainwater gets to them, turns the turbines, then small things light up or sounds start playing. And then on a really heavy day, when it's absolutely thrashing down, you could have objects moving in the park that you just didn't know were there before. So it only happens when it's raining and then becomes a sort of excitement. So when it's raining hard, your kids are saying to you, oh, do you think all the things in the puddle park will be on show today? Should we get our wellies on and go for it? And it gives you an incentive to go out in the worst weather. But it was just an idea. And then last year I was lucky enough to pitch it to TED for their Global Ideas Search and be invited to present it in the TEDx TED Brighton event, which was a range of different ideas that were being presented that people had come up with. They came and did some filming with us and talked to us about the idea and allowed us to put it out there in the world so people can watch the video and hopefully one day there will be such a thing as a puddle park that you will be able to take your kids to. Yeah.
What sort of conversations have you had since then with people who are interested? You know, where's the interest coming from and what do they want to know more about?
After the TED Talk was published online, I contacted my parish council and was invited to one of their parish council meetings just to explain a bit more about it and to say, if it gets off the ground, if we get the technology and we get some engineers involved, would you be open to having one in our local area? Because to me, it seems the ideal thing. We've got a green play space, 2 minutes walk from where I live. There would definitely be a place for that. And they said, yeah, in principle, we would love this to be the first place to have a puddle park. What we will try and do for you is to identify a space within our parish where that might work, where it might fit. And then if you come back to us in the future, we'll say, yeah, that is a dedicated space that you can put something in. What they also said was, we haven't got any money, so don't ask us for funding.
That's always the problem, isn't it? That conversation always stops when it comes to funding.
Yeah. But I totally understand. At this point in time, more hurdles than there are open doors. But that's all right. Just keep sort of chipping away. It's just getting the right combination of interest to line up. I had some assistance from a firm of architects and designers in New York, who the TED organisation put me in contact with, David Rockwell Group. We had some collaborations to put together materials for presenting the idea and some of the answers to the questions that inevitably come up about the use of rainwater and public spaces and all those things. And it was that threw up some really interesting research that they did on my behalf about practices that are happening globally where rainwater and natural water is harnessed and collected for industrial means rather than a play space, but the concepts are the same. So it's understanding the topography of your area, understanding how water runs when it gets to you, where it's being naturally collected, where you could divert it. I did meet with Gina Bradbury Fox from the Outdoor Guide. She is involved in a project where donations of Wellington boots and waterproofs are given to school children and preschoolers so that they can get out and have outside play. This is a big part of it. For me, my children have always been told, put your coat and shoes on, we're going out, it doesn't matter if it's raining. There's a bit of a sort of psychological hurdle to get yourself feeling okay with that.
That's what I'm interested in chatting to you about, because it's an idea that's all about changing how people experience public spaces and water itself. We're talking about sort of that relationship with water and how the relationship on the top might actually affect what's happening beneath us, through to groundwater. And I think it's an interesting concept that before you can understand how to maybe work with water, how to protect it, how to make it work in the best way for communities, you need to actually have a relationship with water and with rain. And I think it's really important at the beginning of this just to sort of upfront do that respectful nod to people who have been flooded. So those who have been flooded have an understandable, not all of them, but some of them, a dislike of rain and a fear of it maybe. But we're talking about starting a conversation sort of before then. And we do know that there's quite an impact on mental health. But looking at those cultural attitudes towards rain, towards puddles, towards getting those kids outside, when do you think it became like a collective understanding that if it rains, we don't get involved? It's, rather than it being a positive experience, it was a problem and a negative thing.
I think you can go back into real fundamental human psychology with this. We are hardwired to seek shelter. In academia, we talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And one of the basic bottom of the pyramid needs that you have to have addressed, along with food and water to drink, is shelter. So we've created shelters for ourselves that are very effective. We've got houses and we've got roofs and we've got cars, and we don't have to interact with unpleasant sensations of being cold and wet, because that can be unpleasant. So we retreat and we come into our houses and we feel very happy that we have that choice to do that. To then recognise that that is not giving you a balance of exposure to daylight and time out in your community, whatever the weather, is very, very difficult. It is a big mental shift. And in a country like this, where we have a lot of rainfall, but it's often accompanied by wind and colder temperatures, and it's not necessarily physiologically pleasant to be in, you have to have a conscious front brain reaction to say to yourself, but actually I'm missing out on other things that are beneficial for me. I'm going to have to push through the discomfort and realise it's not actually that bad. We've all got on board with this thing of moaning about the rain because it prevents us from doing all the fun things you want to do, and makes the garden waterlogged and all those things. So I think there's a fundamental sort of human basic needs thing at play, and just a busy modern life thing. And there's a lot of demands on us. So maybe kitting up and going out in the rain is not top of our priorities.
I saw you in Brighton give your talk, which is, why we're still connected now. And one of the things that really stuck with me was when you said, think about the last moment you felt really alive. Was that inside or outside? Was that an outside feeling? So what do you think we lose when we hide from the rain, or when we come inside as soon as that happens? What do you think we lose sort of emotionally?
I don't know if other people may have noticed when their children are small and they're grizzling and they're in the pushchair, you go outside, don't you? You take yourself outside with them, and then they're outside as well. And generally that has a positive effect. Somewhere along the line you start feeling better because maybe you're having some exercise, you're getting some fresh air, it's a change of scene, you're not in those four walls. In my work, in clinical work, lots of times I've noticed, particularly with patients who are at the end of life, when we get them outside, and it may just be that they're away from the busy hospital ward and the noises and all those things, but that even if they've got reduced consciousness, as soon as they've got fresh air in their face and they can feel the sun on their skin, they relax more. It's just a deep primal connection with nature. We need it. Everybody feels that, and it gets stronger when you're in a beautiful woodland, and it gets stronger when you see a rainbow, and it gets stronger when the sun's beating down on you, and it's like a visceral sensation. We sort of cut ourselves off from that and distract ourselves with other things when we're inside. We're sort of busy, or we're doing jobs, or we're watching TV, or, there's all that sort of stuff. When you're outside, you remove yourself from those stressors and you connect with something really primal.
That makes sense. One of the things you said, was it sort of 50% of the days we have in the UK we have rain?
Yeah.
So if you're cutting yourself off from that primal connection 50% of the time, that's quite a large amount, isn't it? Especially, as you say, with kids, when we're trying to get them to be more aware of their surroundings, to connect with nature in that way. It's a large amount of time to be hiding away. What's interesting to explore is that play parks are playful. They're a fun thing. They're a lovely thing. They're an educational thing. But they could also do a really important job. They have a serious role as well, I think. And a lot of the work that we do is looking at those sort of nature-based solutions, looking at drainage solutions that slow down rainwater. In those conversations, has there been any talk around using them to actually slow down the drainage of water?
Certainly. For the puddle parks, we need to harness rainwater while it's there, but we didn't necessarily want to store it because that comes with other challenges. But then there was conversations about if you were diverting water, let's say underground, to power hydroelectric motors for the puddle park, could you then also allow an on-course for it to be contained in an underwater storage unit or reservoir of some sort to then be used when it was needed or released over a slower time so you don't have a deluge all in one go? That's somewhere where I feel we have some crossover with people who are engineering solutions like that already to harness groundwater and rainwater a managed way to then decide when it's going to get moved on or used to supplement drier times. The other part of that is understanding your topography and understanding how water is moving through your environment at the moment, how that's being affected by housing developments and the way that things are paved and the way that the drainage system is, particularly in this area. So where I live is built on the mining industry. So we've got a lot of Victorian infrastructure for drainage under the ground. And it doesn't really cope very well now because everything's all more built up. But we also have coal mines and shafts and all these things. And I don't know how those impact with the groundwater and things.
A lot of what we talk about is looking at the sort of the natural flow of water and how we can actually bring in more nature-based solutions around that. And I was wondering if there's an interesting sort of melding of techniques where actually that play park could feel like more of a natural environment as well, and incorporating that into the parks and green spaces that we have at the moment where water has perhaps been curtailed and shoved to the edges and it hasn't been allowed to flow naturally. I was wondering, do you think people are more open to those sort of water-based interventions when they are joyful and playful rather than defensive and looking like they're there for infrastructure purposes?
Yes, I haven't met anybody yet who hasn't considered this mind's eye picture of a puddle park incarnation of water usage and not liked it. And not said to me, oh, I wish that was a thing. But I really like what you're saying about nature-based and more natural solutions. That would feed into increasing biodiversity in managed play spaces, which can be just big lumps of grass, can't they? Like we've got a play area with swings and things, and then a big chunk of grass with some goalposts in it. So maybe part of that, we increase the biodiversity, we build it in such a way that it just looks like some interesting planting. And actually what you're not expecting is that these other things happen when it's raining. And that brings an interest and that brings something. So you could have a melding of the best of both worlds, really. So it's a win-win.
Looking at rain gardens, looking at planters that are mini rain gardens, but they then work with the drainage of the rainwater naturally. So there's a learning sort of experience within that as well. How do you think that places like puddle parks would help people understand that water doesn't just disappear. It has to go somewhere. So in building that sort of understanding, especially with children and families, that understanding of natural rainwater has to go somewhere.
One of the things that we would try to do is to showcase the way that the water is transiting through the space that you're using. So it would start off collecting in recessed puddles like you're used to. You see a sort of bit of pavement that's recessed and a puddle collects in there. So it starts off like that. That's what you're familiar with. Kids can jump up and down in their wellies in that. That's all fine. But then as more and more of it accumulates, it's being diverted and channeled in very specific ways, and you can follow that trail. That you could have an educational element to that. You could have signboards that explain, in dry weather, this doesn't look like anything. Watch what happens when it rains. See how different this whole view becomes when water is involved, that we are not directing from a hose kind of thing. Building up and using small amounts of rainfall to do something that's fun, as well as large amounts of rainfall to do something that's unique, and everything in between. So you could follow that journey, and you could use it as an educational tool. If we constrain here, then this is what happens to the water. If we provide soakaways here, this is what happens. If we divert it underground, you can't see it, but it's still there, and it's going to have to come out down at the other end. So, like those speaking tubes that kids love in parks. So, you can say, right, the water's disappearing here. Who can find out where it's coming out? And then you have to go off and you have a challenge to go and find out where it appears at the other end.
When you're trying to engage communities around understanding the impact of flooding, the impact, as you say, you look around you and there are concrete driveways everywhere. There's nothing there to naturally absorb the water. There's nothing there to prevent that build up, and there is nothing there that feels natural and comfortable in that environment. But if you've got those communities who, it doesn't matter to them, we live in a flat, who cares, doesn't matter, or at the top of the hill, it doesn't matter to us, who cares. How would you see engaging those sorts of people, the people who just have no real concept of why that's important?
One part of the Puddle Parks development process, and the key part at the start of it, is anyone who would be interested in having a puddle park in their local area, it all starts with public consultation. So the public consultation would involve trying to engage everybody who it may concern, trying to hook them in with the excitement factor of it and the visualise this, imagine what this would be like, but then getting them to delve into how we decide where it's going to go. If part of the aspect of Puddle Park in one particular local area is that it's addressing an issue with rainwater collecting and flooding risks, then everybody starts to learn about that. And like you say, not just the people who've already been affected or who know something of it, but you have to explain those things. If you're doing a presentation to everyone, we've got this proposal, it's going to be great, it's going to be fabulous, but first we need to understand where things can go, and that is part of us looking at the issues around water in our community. Do you understand the issues around water in our community and groundwater and where it can potentially cause problems? It's always difficult to get people to care, but if they feel like they're going to get something out of it, and somebody's going to fund this amazing new play space for their kids, and somewhere that everyone can go when it's raining, and somewhere that's accessible so people in wheelchairs can come, and all those kind of draws, then you might just start to chip away. You might just start to get some understanding from people who previously have not given it a second thought.
I wonder how we do that job, how we actually get people to come together and decide how we can work on this as a collective rather than in sort of silos. Do you think that's what the TEDx thing has done, or do you think that was just the beginning and there's a lot more to do around that?
That's definitely a beginning, and there's definitely a huge piece of work to do around that. I think there is something to be said, though, for Puddle Parks has got a whole proposal together for a particular community, and we come and we present it maybe at a council meeting with public contributors. Everyone thinks it's brilliant. They think it's absolutely great. And we've got some funding sorted, so nobody's worried about money. Great. So we're all on a winner. We're all on the same page. That's an ideal world, okay? But we'll just put it out there for now. Then, inevitably, people in the know, these different agencies that you talk about, these sort of disparate groups who have an interest, maybe it's a bit of an impenetrable web of people, they will have opinions. And this will be the right place for them to share their opinions. Now, if you get some dialogue, if you get some debate and some to and fro and some things that are going to go in the local newsletter and some chit chat that's going to happen on the Facebook group. Great. You get people debating it and taking a side. Then they're interested. They might not even realise why they're taking a side, but everyone loves to take a side. You love to read a letter to the editor and go, I don't agree with that.
And there is a lot of debate and there's a lot of passion, especially when it comes to those people who have been affected. I think you've got that real balance of people who haven't been flooded, don't know why it's a problem, don't see why there's an issue in the first place. And it's trying to get them to care. You said that you haven't raised this with anybody who said it's a bad idea. Have there been any objections at all, any negativity? What have you come up against that you've had to sort of try and work through?
The biggest practical hurdle seems to be around health and safety concerns of potentially harbouring rainwater that could sit. It could pool somewhere, not be treated, and then cause a health hazard. And particularly when you're talking about play spaces that young people will be involved in or vulnerable people will be using, that's a big sort of red flag. Everyone's like, no, we don't want that. So that's something I know that other organisations, other companies that have come up with similar projects, the main thought is that we're not aiming to pool water at the place of play. So we want the water to transit through, be there temporarily and transit through and go. And then that would be no greater risk than what it is currently. And then this idea of if you're going to store some of it, if you're going to divert it into something, it's away from the public spaces. So the logical thing is underground. That's not always practical, but that it's stored and away. And then if it needs treating to then be moved on, then it gets treated and moved on. Those are some of the major barriers.
So with your experience, and I'm thinking more of your occupational therapy side of things, what is it about you and what you've been through and what you've done that has made this matter so much to you?
One of the things that's really important to occupational therapists is inclusivity, because we often are working with people who are experiencing challenge in their lives because of health conditions or social conditions that are putting them at a disadvantage or making it difficult for them to participate in the occupation. So that's where the occupational bit comes from. My job isn't about people's employment. It's actually the occupations that you do in your everyday life, brushing your teeth, driving your car, looking after your kids, everything. And if you've got a disruption to your ability to do the things that you want and need to do because of a health condition or your social circumstances, then we get involved and we try and work out alternative ways of doing it, ways of getting back to doing it, all those sort of things. So inclusivity is really important to us, and making sure that you've considered every person that might want to access this space. So in my mind, Puddle Parks have to be completely accessible for people with mobility issues. There's got to be something for everybody. You know, you design them, yes, so that people can walk on in their welly boots and enjoy something, but also somebody who needs assistance to be pushed in a wheelchair and maybe is in a level of tilt in their wheelchair, so they need some protection from the elements themselves, but they still want to be able to enjoy. So then you have features that come overhead that, you know, standing people will have to look up to, but somebody who's in a semi-reclined position in a wheelchair is already there. That's what they're enjoying. So inclusivity and accessibility are big buzzwords. They get included every time I talk about Puddle Parks. And there's a sensory element. So anyone who's blind, anyone who's deaf, who has some disability that means that they interact with the world in a different way than you or I, there's something for them as well. There's something they can touch. There's something they can hear or see, or it splashes on them in a certain way. So that makes it quite fun to design. And especially I find if you ask children will tell you what they want in the Puddle Park. They know what they want. So that's brilliant. But they're not just for children, they're for absolutely everybody. And half the battle is getting the parents to want to go. The children often are quite happy to go outside if it's raining. It's the parents who are kind of like, nah, not interested in that. So the Puddle Park is for everybody. And then if you say to children, imagine you've got a person who is blind. What would you do to help them enjoy the Puddle Park? They come up with the best ideas. So I think being an occupational therapist helps me to think a bit like that. But also, one of my buzzwords in my clinical practice is joy. Like, let's start there. Tell me what's important to you today. I could impose on you that I think you need to work on going up the stairs better and things like that. But if that's not important to you, and if you've got something else you'd rather do that would make you happy, well, I'm happy to work with that. Puddle Parks are joyful. They're fundamentally supposed to be joyful spaces.
You're seeing this as permission and an invitation. You're not telling people they should be doing this. Is that a deliberate approach?
No, I don't think it is deliberate. I don't think I'd looked at it that way, to be honest. I would just hope to just carry everybody along on a wave of enthusiasm.
There's a lot to be said for obviously being in an environment where you have access to all of that natural outdoor space, that beauty around you. And I get the impression that from where you live, you have that. How do you think those towns and cities would feel different if puddle parks were to be a thing for us in the UK?
I'm hoping that it would feed back into this idea we were talking about earlier of integrating natural spaces and the natural features that will help with groundwater flooding into urban environments. So maybe you've had a play space that's been there for years and it's largely paved over. Maybe you rethink that space. Maybe you pull out that stuff, or at the time that that play park is going to be revamped, you reconsider how that scape could look and how you could bring in some more nature into those small corners. There's always areas of wasteland in urban landscapes. So maybe there's a call to action and a challenge to not necessarily stick a load of housing on there because, you know, that's the lucrative thing to do, but maybe protect it, rewild it. Possibly puddle parks would be part of that.
Yeah, there's definitely a fear, I think, amongst a lot of people when you see a green space and in their vision it's neat and tidy, it's mowed, it's clean, it's clear, that feels okay. When it starts to get wild, there's quite often a perception that it's not being looked after, but actually that's what we need to bring back, that wild, unkempt, letting water take its natural flow, letting nature take its natural place and giving it that room and space to breathe. So engaging people as early as possible, that we can help people understand the quality and the value of that natural environment, the better. So that bringing it in right at the early stages with the little ones has got to be part of that process.
My brother lives not too far away. He lives in a miner's terrace. So they've got the long garden, sort of 300-foot garden, which obviously back in the Victorian times would have grown all their veggies and all those sort of things. So it's quite a common setup around here. So his garden slopes downwards and it slopes down towards a small river. The bottom of his garden for the first, 10 years that they lived in the house was a bog. The grass wouldn't grow properly. It was just like this sort of muddy heap that was in the way, and they couldn't put a shed where they wanted a shed, and all these issues. And it was partly fed by a spring. So there's a spring that's coming across some of the gardens. A number of years ago, probably 8 years ago, he just had a change of mindset. He thought, I'm going to work with the water. He found out where the spring was coming onto their property and he channeled it. He's made this mini wetland nature reserve in the bottom of his garden. There's no visual signs of the channeling. It's all been done very naturally and very subtly. But now there's places where they get frog spawn. He's got a huge array of wonderful sort of marshland plants. It's not overspilling and causing them a problem underfoot when they need to get right down to the bottom to the access at the back. He's done a fantastic job of just actually accepting that that spring is there and that the water's coming and working with it, and it's had a win-win. So they've got this amazing wetland wildlife garden at the bottom of their garden and none of the problems that they had before.
So what would you love for planners or councils or other flood professionals to know about puddle parks? What do you think is really important for them to understand and maybe then impact how we're designing residential areas, green spaces?
I think I would like them to keep the word community in their minds. So a really important part of the whole puddle parks process, from conceiving it in your area and designing it, and it's all about community, letting the community have a say in how some of their public spaces are going to be used, involving the community from the outset, acting on what the community tell you they actually want, letting the community design what's going to happen so they feel ownership of it, explaining all the related features about, yes, this is a play space, but it's more than that, and we're going to use it to educate people about groundwater, and we're going to tap into this thing of working in synergy with nature. And this is the whole point. Somebody's going to say, well, why are you restricting it to just when it's rainy days? Why don't you have some mains fed features that are there all the time? No, the whole point is that nature is going to direct this and we are at its mercy. And it's all the more interesting and exciting for that, because you don't know when it's going to happen. So then you get excited about it. And then bringing in the community again when you've got your puddle park, it's up and running, people are getting enthusiastic about using it and telling their friends they went to it and it was great. I really envisage it being a a festival atmosphere. So, the dankest, wettest, coldest, windiest day you can imagine here in the UK, everyone's outside having a party because the lights are going, the music's on, everything's flashing, and you never expected it, and it's a total surprise. Community is kind of the answer to all of it. A lot of what we've been talking about is how do you get people interested? How do you keep them interested? How do you get them to think about what might not affect them but is going to affect their neighbours? It's community, isn't it?
If we got better at welcoming rain into our daily lives, how do you think that would impact on how we coped with flooding?
I hope that would enable us to think like people who have lived with water being a scarcity. So a lot of our apathy and dislike comes from just that we have a surplus. We have a surplus of this rain. Everyone's happy if we've had a dry spell and then the garden gets a soaking. So we're happy at that point. But then if it goes on too long, we're off the boil. Actually, having travelled the world a little bit and been to places where water is a very scarce resource, it's viewed as being much more precious. So I would hope that people start to see it as the precious resource that it is and understand that actually we can't blame the weather for the way that it impacts us here. Flooding is terrible. It's life-altering, has a long emotional impact. But things have changed. The world has changed, the climate is changing. We have to evolve, we have to change with it, and just release the bad energy. That's not going to find the answers. Keep the energy positive, keep it solution-focused. Work with, not against. That's the only way that we're going to get some sort of reconciliation. Imagine that you did live somewhere where rain was a scarcity and water was a scarcity. You would feel very differently. You would stand outside with your face turned up to the lashing rain much more often because you would want to thank it for being there.
So is there any way, if anybody wanted to discuss Puddle Parks with you more, how could they do that?
puddleparks@gmail.com. Simple as that. I'd be happy to hear from you.
I think your joy comes across from you, but also your energy and that positivity comes across. So thank you so much for spending your time with us today. So if you've liked what you've heard today, then do remember to subscribe, leave a review, maybe share this with people that you think might be interested to hear more as well. And if you've got a topic that you'd like us to discuss, or maybe you want to join me, talk about your personal experience, then you can also drop me an email at groundwaterrising@projectgroundwater.co.uk. And we'll be back next month. Thank you so much, Hazle.
Thank you, Helen. It's been a joy.